you started teaching here in 2007, you think?
7, I think.
Yeah. So tell me about the start of your teaching career, actually.
That was in the early 2000s, so I think about 2001. And I started in the Royal Irish Academy. I actually took over for somebody, I think, who was poorly, and was asked just to do a few hours. It wasn't something I was considering just at that point, because I was still doing a lot of professional singing and busy. So I thought I'd just give, I think, maybe 3 hours a go. And of course, within a few years, you get sort of drawn in, and I reached a point where I thought, if you're really going to do this properly and give it your all, you can't be 2 different people, or it's difficult to be 2 different people. It's difficult to be the singer and then suddenly morph into the teacher, or the other way around, actually, to be the teacher and then suddenly have to morph into being, the singer, which takes a different kind of effort. So little by little, I sort of curtailed the amount of performing I was doing, until eventually I was doing more teaching than performing, and that went on for quite a few years until I decided, look, I'll just commit myself totally, which I did.
That's a very interesting point, because in the training of young singers, I mean, of course, you're training them for a career as a singer, but do you also impart any knowledge about how they might then become educators? Does that ever come into the teaching?
I think more and more now, for sure. But even back in 2000, I think the trend was really more when you taught, when you went into teaching. So when you moved from being a performer to a teacher, you simply taught what in the way that you had been taught. And I think it's interesting that we should be talking about this at this particular time, because my own teacher, who was Veronica Dunn, has just passed away recently, and she left such a huge impression on everybody she taught, and luckily a very positive impression as well. So to feel that you were able to pass that on, gave you a huge amount of confidence as a young teacher. And then to feel that maybe your own students will then continue to pass that on is nice feeling, for sure.
Yeah, it's timely, in fact, that you mentioned Ronnie, and because I know she was your teacher. And when you were a student of Ronnie's, were you aware of the position she had within singing in Ireland at that stage? Did it strike any kind of fear or awe in you at the time? Or?
Well, I wouldn't say it struck fear and awe in as much as I wasn't easily, cowed in that way. But I was absolutely, for sure, knew that I'd never met anybody quite like her, either before or since. She was certainly, a force of nature, as has been said, by many people. And I came from a very, what dare I say, normal background of, normal people. In my case, I was even adopted, as a very small baby. So there was no kind of way of knowing where music came from, and it was just a stroke of luck that my parents, decided to kind of send me to music as a child and stuff. Otherwise, I possibly could have gone through my whole life never having been exposed to music, but meeting with Ronnie, and coming from that sort of background where, we never really we were more theatre family, actually. My mum was big into theatre, but music was just incidental. We did it because it was fun, and that was it. So meeting her was a real revelation in that respect,
Because you mentioned that you're from the wee county, so I'd love to know about your life growing up and your first experiences of music, and when you realised that you had a voice.
Yeah. I said to you I was adopted, and so like when I was about maybe 3 days old or something, so very small, and the story goes, I know every child who ever sang probably has a story along these lines, but I had an aunt or a grand-aunt or some sort of relative who was a nun in the Poor Clare convent in Carlow, where they were enclosed all the time. They never got out. And every year we made this huge long journey from County Louth to Carlow, which in those days, and we're going back a long way, was like the other end of the world. And we always went and you know, we chatted away to the nuns and had a bit of lunch and went back and chatted more. And we saw them through this tiny little grill, you know, a sort of a double thing. You could barely see them. And the story went that when the first time I was brought as a very small baby, they had a sort of turnstile thing that you brought gifts with you, whatever you thought they would use to make things. My father worked for Clark's Shoes, so he would bring big sides of leather for them, and they made little things for babies' prams and things like that babies had in prams. But anyway, I was put into this turnstile and sent in to the nuns, and there was a very elderly Mother Abbess who, before my mother left, called my mother aside and said, "You need to make sure that baby is involved in music, because I can hear music in her voice when she laughs." And that was what the words always stuck in my mother's head. My mother hadn't a tune of any description, none. And I then was sent to Irish dancing at 3, and I used to come home apparently and say to my mum, "Could you la the music for me while I dance?" And she'd start lying, and she said I used to stop dead in my tracks and go, "That's the wrong music." So it went on, and I was very lucky to, you know, that my parents did sort of make the effort to seek out, you know, piano teachers and all the rest of it, you know. But I was a hopeless student. Like I loved to do it. I was full of it, you know. I was full of the dancing and the singing and all the rest of it. But in terms of ever wanting to do it seriously, or I think that was a way down the line, so far that I almost missed the boat, I sometimes think, you know. But in terms of the dancing, the one thing that has struck me, I did go back recently to a dancing classes for the Wrinklies, and when I first went, I suddenly realised when the teacher started the music that actually that was the thing that used to make me want to dance. It wasn't, well, it was to some extent the physical thing of it, but actually it really was the music. You know, we were reminiscing about we had fantastic musicians, live musicians in those days, who would play for classes and competitions and stuff, and that was the thing that would really kind of make you want to do it, you know. So that was all the younger things, and then I ended up going to Maynooth to do music, having not had any serious music happening for a while. And there was a wonderful professor of music called Noel Watson, a priest in Maynooth, and he said he brought everybody in to have a go and see what they were going to do in terms of their instrument, and I was planning to sing. And so he said, "Well, what would you like to sing?" I thought, "Oh, don't really know anything, you know." And all I could remember was Nana Muscuri's "Try to Remember." I don't know if anybody remembers that one. And so I sang it, and he said, "Have you ever had singing lessons?" And I said, "Well, I did go to Ronnie Dunn for a year," which I did, while I was doing my intercert. And then I stopped, and he said, "Well, I suggest you give her a ring and ask if she'd take you back." So I did. So that's when I used to come back in and out from Maynooth. And then eventually Ronnie said, "Oh, come on, lovely, now you need to be serious about it." And so I sort of, I got my act together eventually and became a bit more serious about the actual singing. But it was never, you know, sometimes you hear people saying, "Oh, I always wanted to be an opera singer from I'd never even heard of that species of person until I was well into my 20s, that you could actually be something called an opera singer." So that was what. Was there
any point when you were growing up, did you actually consider a career in dancing?
Well, no. Not because I was going to say not because I wasn't good enough, but actually it wasn't that. There was no such thing though in those days. Like this, we're going way back pre-Riverdance here, you know. I was born too soon. If I had been, you know, later on, for sure, I would have been in the middle of Riverdance. I wouldn't have been Jean Butler now, but, you know, I would have been kind of in it, for sure. I mean, but that just wasn't a an option. No more, to be honest, when I see the young students nowadays who have degrees in the performing arts. There was no such thing as a degree in the performing arts, you know, in my day. You either kind of did music on an academic level or you didn't really. But Ronnie, again, was instrumental in sort of forming that sort of degree program, you know, when it actually wasn't really there. But she knew what was needed, and so she made it happen for us.
Yeah, and the discipline of dancing, like I'm finding this story very interesting. The discipline that you have to have from dancing, and also the rhythmical accuracy that's so vital to dancing. Did that translate later into singing?
For sure. If there's one thing that drives me nuts, it's a lack of rhythm. I just don't understand it. I don't get it, that somebody can lack a pulse and lack a rhythm. I find that really hard to understand. And I remember then, you know, when time went on, I sang an awful lot of contemporary work that would have been written for me, and some of it was extremely difficult. And it would take me forever to work out the rhythm, but it was what I would do first and foremost. And once I had that done, then it was like it was a key to everything else. I often wondered if there was a doctorate somewhere that to find out why is it, because there are some people who don't have an actual sense of rhythm. Have you ever seen people who are clapping along to music and they can't clap in time? I would love to know what that is.
I suppose it's a sense of internal pulse. You know, I mean, I agree with you. I think it's a vital thing for any musician that you have a sense of pulse. And I think if it's something that doesn't come instinctively to you, you need to spend a lot of time on a metronome.
Ah, yeah.
You know, you really do.
And then there's the rhythm, and then there's the sort of the energy behind there's the pulse, but then there's the energy behind the rhythm. And again, when you watch really top-class musicians either singing or playing, they have so much rhythmical expression, you know, that brings the whole thing bubbling off the page, you know. I find it fascinating.
And would you focus a lot on this with your students then, that the importance of this?
I would. Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me now, so we've gotten as far as Maynooth, and you've got a degree, and was it pure music you did?
It was, well, I did music, and in those days it was a very odd degree. It was music and other things like English probably. I think I even did sociology. I think I did a bit of geography. But I kind of think the less said about my time in Maynooth, possibly the better, other than I had a fantastic time. There were only we're talking the 70s now, so it wasn't that long open to external students, so it was the National Seminary. So essentially all us girls were going into a situation where you had an awful lot of boys who had never sort of had an awful lot of connection with a lot of girls before, so it was
a hardship.
Hardship. It was bliss. It was great. It was an awful lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, and you know, it was all good, harmless fun as I see it, looking back, for sure. Yeah. I enjoyed every single minute of it.
Brilliant. And then what happens?
Well, and then that was where Ronnie stepped in and said, "Now, lovey, you don't want to be doing any of that kind of academic stuff. You just want to get in here and sing." And I was saying to somebody very recently, I don't even ever remember having a conversation with my parents to say, this is what, I just did it. I just went in, and, you know, Ronnie would say, "Now, lovey, I have a flat for you." And looking back, I don't even know where the money came from, to be honest. I don't know. I have no idea. But I had a flat, and she would find other people to live in the flat, and then every morning she would ring me at, I think, about 7:30 to make sure I was up, and then I had to be at the bottom of the road at 7:45, and she would pick me up, and I would be in having an hour's technique every morning of the week at 8 o'clock. So it was a tough regime, you know, but it kind of, yeah, it's lasted me my whole life, that sort of technical grounding. There's no sort of there's nothing else, there's no substitute for that, really. So it was amazing.
But you did leave, you did go away.
I did.
Yeah,
I did. I mean, I think again we were very aware that whatever we needed, it wasn't all available here. and Ronnie having herself been abroad to study and sung in Covent Garden and sung with Welsh National as a sort of a new company, I think she was keenly aware that no matter how hard she tried to create all the language input we need and the coaching and the technique and everything, it just wasn't all ever going to be here for us to the level that we needed it. So I again was very lucky to get a few Arts Council scholarships actually, and I went off to Guildhall onto the postgraduate opera course at Guildhall and did a couple of years there, and then into the National Opera Studio for a final sort of year of proper study. Not that the study ever stops, but I mean, that kind of study.
And the roles then, they started to roll in. Tell us about that. That must have been very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, those times were really nice. And my first jobs were really at Glyndebourne, which, is a pretty, when I say impressive place to start, I mean just because the place itself is very impressive, and the level of detail and the costumes and the wigs and again, all those things that Ronnie would talk about, the vocal coaching with people, conductors that had worked with all the famous people in the world, so the amount of information, if you were keen and you wanted to progress, you were so aware that you were absolutely in the right place. So it was as well as it being a very, lovely time. I don't know how people feel about it nowadays, but certainly I don't think I've ever met anybody in the business who wasn't actually really nice. And the more talented people were, the nicer they were. If there was anybody who was a bit off, it was normally somebody who maybe was not quite so confident in their own talent, but most people, all right across the board. And I have really fantastic memories of all that time. And I sang, as well as being very young at the time and understudying, lots of big roles. I had a couple of opportunities to actually go on, when you get the call at 2:00 in the afternoon. And I remember once the girl I was sharing a house with took a phone call, and I'm sitting beside her and she went, yeah, okay. Okay, I'll tell her you're on tonight, she said to me. And then she goes, well, I think she, yes, no, she's fine. Well, actually, I think she's just about to cry. Hold on a minute. Are you okay? I'm fine. Yes, I'm fine. So, the shock of suddenly knowing that you're going to be going on to sing Carmen or something enormous, that you've been working really hard on, but you knew that the chances of you getting on in a huge festival like Glyndebourne were very slim, and then for it to happen, when you have like 3 hours or whatever to get yourself together, those were very exciting times. And again, everybody sort of pulling together, costume, makeup, wigs, everybody getting you sorted out. So, it was lovely, very sort of really nice collegiate sort of, supportive.
I always feel that it takes incredible courage, not being a singer, having an instrument to hide behind. I always feel it takes great courage to stand up in front of a big audience and, an orchestra and have all this focus on you as a singer, and having to deliver it. It's an extraordinary thing. It
I
really
suppose
is.
in operatic terms, it's easier. I suppose for a lot of my career as well, I've been really, really interested in recital work and concert work, and that took up a lot of my time, and a lot of my operatic colleagues found that really hard to understand, because in operatic terms, once you're in character and you're in your costume and your wig and whatever, and with your colleagues on the stage, well, it's not just you, for starters. So that everybody out there has the opportunity to watch somebody else. So it's, they're not just watching you. And you're not you. You're not exposing you. You just step into somebody else's shoes. Whereas when you're doing recitals and concerts, it so is just you. And that is a different ball game entirely. And we've all, I probably am looking at this stage of my life, looking back, my glasses are rather rose tinted, but I do recall having to deal with serious kind of, gremlins on the shoulder. You know, the way that you go through phases where you always hear the person on your shoulder who's telling you the worst possible things that you really don't want to hear, just as you're about to step out onto the National Conservatoire stage. You could do without him then. It's good to have that sort of thing that makes you want to be better and to sort something out and stuff. But when you're just about to step on is not when you want that to be there. And I think that whole psychological performance skills, performance anxiety, all of those things have come much more to the fore in modern pedagogy and modern approaches to performing and to teaching, and we sort of spend more time dealing and training people how to deal with those. But in my day, you just kind of took one deep breath and took that leap of faith and off you went.
So you've been teaching at the Conservatoire since 2007. And here we are in our brand new facility. But I think it's very exciting, the wandering around the last couple of days, just finding my way around the campus. The possibilities, the opportunities.
Endless. We have the well-designed degree courses. We have really good teachers who are now becoming much more pedagogically tuned. And the whole question, certainly of vocal pedagogy, has come on since we're now actually able to see into people's throats while they're singing. We can actually see, because the big thing was you could never see what was happening. Now we can see. So all of that is coming on. We have fantastic facilities.
Here's an interesting thing. Certainly within the instrumental world, it's become the term portfolio career has become quite popular. How do you see that working for singers? Do you think there's scope there for singers to broaden out from having one discipline?
Well, I think there's certainly a lot of possibilities, even in terms of things like music therapy and that sort of area of music that I think there are things that singers can do. I'd be very curious to know, how many. I'd love to see somebody doing a study as to how many singers actually come out the other end, and 10 years' time they're still in a singing job. I also think it is also the onus on institutions and conservatories to make young people aware that there are very few of them who are going to end up even as solo singers, but there are professional choirs out there, there are choruses out there, professional choruses, and again, you have to I kind of feel it's a little bit of an area that's frustrating for me, because I feel that in terms of course content particularly, for me, there's only a couple of things that singers really need to be able to do. Apart from have a really good vocal technique, which of course is a big thing. I'm not saying they're little things, but they need to be able to sight read. And they need to be able to count, they need to be able to sight read, and they need to have some language, good language facility. That's it. If you have those 4 bottles full, so your vocal technique is there, your language skills are there, your rhythmical skills are there, and your ability to pitch and to read music. If you have all of those, you have huge options as a performer.
So just going back to your singing career, if you had to choose a role that you had that you would go out and do again tomorrow, just what was it? What was the one that stood out for you?
Okay, so I had I suppose I had a bit of a sort of a stop-start career in a sense. When I was very young and I was here with Ronnie, I remember, I think I won something like, it used to be called the Golden Voice of Ireland, or some lovely title like that. And myself and Ronnie were traipsed out to RTE for maybe late date or something that went on late in the evenings with Morgan somebody or other. Went into filming, can't remember, the lovely man. And Ronnie's a great chatter, as I'm sure everybody knows, and so she was chatting away, and I think he must have said to her something like, so, where do you think this young girl's going to end up? And she said, oh, now lovely, she'll be singing Wagner. Now you You just mark my words, she was singing Wagner. And I remember sitting beside her at 20 or whatever thinking, she's even more nuts than I ever thought she was, you know. And 20 years later, 25 years later maybe, was my first Wagner ring cycle in the UK. And it was the only time in my entire career that I have stood there and thought, oh my God, this is like falling off a log. This is like so easy. And we had a wonderful conductor, and I said to him, something can't be right here. This just seems to be so easy. And he said, look, it's only easy because it's for you. And that's the only time, and you know, as things would have it, it was, you know, towards the latter end of my career that I ended up singing Wagner, which was probably in vocal terms exactly the right thing that should have happened. But she had foreseen it way back, you know, 20 years earlier. So that, I'd have to say, was the highlight. So I had about 5 or 6 years where I sang, you know, 3 or 4 full ring cycles through. And it included singing with a man called Sir Donald McIntyre, who was one of the sort of best known votans in the world. So that was a hugely special time. And it came at a time when I was, you know, kind of, I suppose, at home with myself. I was comfortable in my skin, and I felt I'd kind of landed, and I kind of was thinking, what have I been doing all the rest of the time? What have I been singing, you know, when I should have been doing other things? But anyway, that's the way things happen. So that really was a very special time for me.